So if you are the one who is ever present, you are unchanging, you are unaffected by what changes, because unchanging means you are infinite. What is changing cannot touch what is unchanging. And what is you as the one who is infinite. When that is seen, when you sort of recognize, not only just recognize it, but you take ownership of that. Taking ownership of that means that you put your mind on this fact about yourself, focusing more on yourself as one who is infinite and not on one who is finite. If this is done, then that starts to really stick or stay with you. Because really speaking, when you think about it, the problem is not you. The problem is your mind. Your mind is what has the tendency to identify with everything else but what its own true nature is. When you look upon yourself as infinite, your mind is automatically making that switch from being focused on everything that is out there away from you to being focused on the very essence of yourself as one who is ever present and abiding. So you are the subject ever present and abiding. Therefore, when your mind focuses that way, that mind then becomes present and abiding and recognizes that its inherent nature, its underlying essence, what powers up your very mind is in fact infinite. And the mind will take to that. Your mind will like that because A, what's not to like, and B, it sees that there is a sense of presence and calm, even though you can find yourself in the midst of a lot of change. You begin to understand you are not changing, even though the world could be changing. In fact, the world could be going to hell in a handbasket, and yet you can ever remain as the one who is present and abiding, because that's who you are. So what does it take then? It takes then my conscious willingness, and that means my mind's conscious willingness to shift. So this is, of course, again, the whole idea of this inquiry and this pursuit or study is to help that mind. Your mind is habituated to going out in all these other directions. And it's habituated to always thinking of the small things, being caught up in what is finite. And yet, it really ultimately, if it scratches its head and thinks about it, it doesn't really want to be affected. It doesn't want to be torn asunder by changes. But it will always be affected and torn asunder, if you will, because the identification is with that. Whatever you identify with it, that is what you are. You are how you see yourself. So a mind caught up in change in all of the objects is really speaking suffering from a case of mistaken identity. Identifying with what it is not, as opposed to making that shift to focusing on its own essential nature, which is you, the subject, unchanging. So a mind which can cognize that and thereafter really make that shift, focus in that direction, is a mind then which becomes abiding. And it stays abiding. It's not just temporary, it stays. The more there is that shift, the more the mind becomes familiar, the more it takes ownership of its own essence. And as your mind does that, it becomes more clear and solid and unaffected even further, even though, again, everything else can keep changing. So such a mind, this is your mind, it's up to you to decide whether you want to be caught up in what is finite and changing and identify with that, and, expect that it's always going to leave you sort of in that same setup, because finite will never become infinite, or you want to make that shift. use the mind to make that shift, to focus on yourself as you are, as one who is ever present, unaffected, infinite, unchanging, and thereafter abiding. If that shift is made, then it is the shift to what is infinite. So the gain of the infinite is an infinite gain. The loss of the infinite is an infinite loss. So it's up to you as as you are, which way do you want to go? And if you say, no, I think I'll stay with infinite or finite, we say go right ahead, but then you can't complain because you're always going to end up in the same place. Whereas this puts you in a space that just lasts, it doesn't quit, and it leaves you with always that abiding sense of well-being.